Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Valley Best Shalom. I'm Rabbi Noah Farkas. It's Sunday morning at 10 a.m. on May 17th. I hope everyone is doing okay at home. I'm sitting here again in my backyard, which is where I do this little schmooze from, and it's just been a really enjoyable day. We had a wonderful Shabbat yesterday, celebrating the bat mitzvah of Samara Stern. And then the kids and I, we hung out all afternoon, went for bike rides, swam in the pool. It was just really nice, and had Havdalah last night. And this morning, I'm joined by my good friend Isaac. Isaac, it's nice to see you. And Isaac and I will be speaking in just a couple of minutes about his work as an artist and being a paper cutter and just a really amazing, cool guy. But first, I want to just give you some updates and announcements and welcome anyone who wants to say hello, give a comment or a question. We'll be doing our best to be sort of sharing those and bringing comments and questions all the way through this sort of hour together. Let me just tell everyone a little bit what's happening at VBS and what the newest and latest and greatest of what we're going to be doing through our Valley Best Shalom at home experience. So today you're with me, Isaac, and then later today we have our backyard concert with Cantor Barron. And that's going to be with Yoel Sykes, who is one of the co-founders and performers of Nava Tehillah. So he'll be talking a little bit about his life and doing some music with him, which is super exciting. Tonight, 6 p.m. is Minyan with me and meditation with Cantor Barron at 7 p.m. Tomorrow morning, we have morning Minyan because we have Minyan twice a day every week. If you are a member of Valley Best Shalom and are a member of our Chazak group, our active adult community, there's a program called Who Cares About Yiddish? The Whys and Wherefores by Mary Corral, who's the CEO of the California Institute for Yiddish Culture and Language, as well as celebrate a celebration of our coming together for learning as active adults in Chazak with Rabbi Feinstein. And you can always contact the people at Chazak if you'd like access to that Zoom. And tomorrow night is 6 p.m. is Minyan. And then on Monday night, 7 p.m. tomorrow night, is our VBS Family Trivia Night. So if you are a member of Valley Best Shalom, we have an entire trivia game we put together for the entire community. And if you register, you can get the Zoom account for that. On Tuesday morning is Minyan again, and I'll be doing a Kavanah. There's meditation as always. Rabbi Feinstein has his weekly storytelling at that point. In the evening, Minyan, and then afterwards in the evening, there'll be Pirkei Avot study. We do one Mishnah a week, and you can come and learn with me. 7 p.m. right back here on Facebook Live and YouTube Live. And also later in the evening, if you're a member of our sisterhood, Women's Auxiliary Group, you'll have Wine and Wisdom at 8 p.m. So those are just some things that are coming up. And one last thing that I just want to say is a congratulations, Mazel Tov, to all of our Hebrew school students, our Eitz Chaim Learning Center students, who, as of right now today, are having their stepping up Aliyah ceremony. And we want to wish each and every one of those families and students a Mazel Tov on a full year of learning together and being together, and just wishing you the absolute best. If you're on Valley Best Shalom Facebook page, you can come find me there right now. If you're not, if you please join us there. We want to welcome Adina is with us, and I see Judy is watching with us, and Talia is watching with us, and just want to welcome all of you to our page, and welcome Isaac. Isaac, it's nice to see you. How are you?
Holding up here. It's I think it's Sunday. You announced that, which is good. I am not always entirely sure what day or what time of the day it is, but we're holding up here. I'm here in confinement with my wife and our 3 virtually adult kids, some of whom are home from college, some of whom are just here from high school, and we're getting by a day at a time.
That's great. And I see that you're in your studio, which is really, really cool. Isaac, for those of you who don't know, Isaac is a premier Jewish artist. We're lucky to have him here in Southern California. He combines pop culture, comic book art with the very traditional Jewish art of paper cutting. And Isaac, it's one of the things I really love about your work is the sort of modern and ancient combination altogether. It's just so very smart, and I really appreciate it. Maybe tell me a little bit about. Let's tell the folks who are watching a little bit about paper cutting, where it comes from, what is it. Not everyone knows about these things, so tell us a little bit about that
Sure.
kind of art.
I was going to say I could grab my book off the shelf and just read from that. That would be boring for everyone. But paper cutting, yeah, it's a traditional Jewish art form. One of the things that I talk about when people ask why do Jews cut paper is a little tongue in cheek. I mean, it's a very portable, inexpensive craft or art to practice. All you need is, I say, something sharp and something flat and thin to cut, and then you can cut paper. It's something that Jews have done in terms of decorative arts, in terms of ritual arts, like a Mizrach plaque, which would designate which side, which wall of your house faces east, so you know in which direction to pray. It's the sort of thing that the Jews have used for ketubot since, 1400s in Italy. We've seen a lot of ketubot from there that are paper cut. It's something that Jews have practiced all over the world for hundreds of years. We have documented. It's hard to keep paper for too long. It tends to degrade if it's not well cared for. So we find a lot of ritual objects in ketubot, but beyond that, not as much. But yeah, it's something that I discovered back in the day when I was engaged and my wife and I were looking for a ketubah artist. We found a wonderful paper cutter named Deborah Band. That's when I fell in love with the idea of paper cuts. The next year we were living in Israel for her first year of rabbinic school, and I needed something to do. I followed some artists around, watched them in their studios, bought myself a knife and a cutting mat, and taught myself to cut paper. And I've been doing it for about 25 years now.
Now, Isaac, were you an artist before? Were you always had an artistic background, or is this something that you came into, as a young man?
I mean, it's almost two different questions that you've asked there. One is, was I an artist before this? The answer is no. Did I have an artistic bent? Perhaps. I was a graphic designer. That's what I really, I had an English major at UCLA, but what I fell in love with while working at the Jewish news magazine there, Ha'am, was not just writing, but design and layout. And I learned all about graphic design, and that's in fact what I started doing professionally once I got out of school. I think a lot of that design sensibility comes through in my paper cutting. I like to imagine that what I'm doing is a very contemporary interpretation of a traditional art form. So whereas a lot of the traditional paper cuts that you might see, they appear to have been folded in half, and they've got lions and doves and vine work and traditional imagery. What I'm doing is a more modern take on it, more geometric, more abstraction, more incorporation of type and image together. Certainly, my use of comic books is not something that's traditionally done with paper cutting.
Your use of comic books is probably one of my favorite aspects of it, because it actually, the using that as the background paper, I think this is where I got this right from you, just adds depth. It adds the background paper has always been either a color or some kind of pattern, or maybe a floral pattern of some sort. But by adding in, like, being very intentional about which background for which part of the paper, especially when you incorporate those little like chat bubbles or thought bubbles, like with the speaking of the comics, it's almost like adding depth, and I really appreciate that. For those of us who are watching online, if you'd like to ask Isaac a question, or about his process, or about anything, it's really open for you. We're definitely open to taking comments. Isaac, maybe you want to explain that piece of art that you just pulled up in front of us.
Yeah, and I realized that perhaps your audience is here for you, and the VBS community may not be familiar with what I'm doing. So I thought I'd bring up a little piece that I've been working on here in the studio, so you can see what we're talking about when we say using comic books in the work. So the paper cuts are really two layers. This is a small one. There's this initial outer side, which is cut through with a knife. You can see me through it. And then behind it are these collaged sections of comic books that I'm using, so that when they are put together, what you have is this finished form, so that the comics actually give structure and another level to the paper cut itself. Now, this is it's a golem. I've been working on golems here in my studio. For those of you who are familiar with golems, you'll know that they are an ancient Jewish mythological creation. We have texts about them and stories. The Jews would create golems to help them when there were enemies at the door. Rabbi Judah Lieb in Prague was supposed to have made the first golem. He molded it from clay, gave it life, and it was able to protect the Jews. And in fact, they say that he had written the word emet on the golem's forehead, which is the Hebrew word for truth. And that when the golem's job was finished, the rabbi would merely rub the aleph away, leaving the word met, which is Hebrew for death, and the golem would become inanimate once again. So yeah, confinement and lockdown, I've been thinking about, what do we look to as sources of comfort or protection? There are so many things right now that might feel overwhelming and difficult to deal with. And so I've been cutting these golems, not to protect me. It's not this sort of idle thing, but as a way maybe to inspire me that we have faced hardship before. We have come through it. We have made our own forms of deliverance and rescue. We have, somehow found a way to survive. They're a reminder of that.
I love
this
that.
one in particular.
Yeah, go ahead. I want you to explain, like, what is it that we're looking at?
Oh, sure. So this one is made with cut up Captain Marvel comics. You may have seen the Shazam movie from DC. Young Billy Batson is a teenager. He says the magic word Shazam and is transformed into this grown man superhero, Captain Marvel. And so this is made with cut up Captain Marvel comics. And in fact, his body here is made from this lightning bolt shape. I was trying to give him this sort of strength inspired by that hero, the idea of lightning and divine power being the source of this golem's strength. And if you look here, I'll zoom into the camera. You can see in his face the word Shazam, which again is the magical transforming word. I'm using that in place of Emmet. And then in the shoulders, you can see I can do that. I can protect the world. And these clenched fists and this sort of this stance of coming forward, approaching danger, ready to step in and give support to us when we need it.
I love that. And tell me, did you have other golems, or are you like that you're thinking about? Like that's like a lightning storm, Shazam. Is there other ones that you're thinking of? Other products, other types of golems that you've been thinking through?
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, so an artist's sketchbook is a sacred thing. We don't really show off. I checked this page first before I brought it onto the camera. Even my wife knows I am often reluctant to reveal the sketch stage. But yeah, I've been playing with these golem shapes for quite some time. And so in addition to the Captain Marvel one, this is one that I made out of cut up Ragman comic, and I've got a dozen that I've been building over the past couple of weeks. Ragman is actually the first mainstream canonical Jewish superhero. His dad was a schmata guy on the Lower East Side in New York who collected rags and then resold them. And he now has a junk shop, and he finds this old suitcase full of rags. It turns out it's a suit, and it imbues him with the powers that he uses to fight evil. It's got a lot of heavy golem imagery in the storyline. In fact, the word that you can see here in his head, where it says Emmet, is from the comic. This is a comic book that's well aware of its Jewish heritage and the stories that come from the Jewish people. So, this golem made out of all those rags, but still this heavy, bulky, muscly figure is, really dependent on our Jewish mythology and that comic book narrative.
I love that. I absolutely love that. I'm just wondering though, like, all right, so you have the comic book background, the paper cut foreground, more or less, right? What's
Mhm.
unique about comic books on so many levels is that every comic book hero has some kind of mythological or special power. That's what makes them a superhero. Whether it's there are a few anti-heroes we know, but like generally speaking, you can fly, you are super strong, you can manipulate lightning, you have a suit made of rags that turn you very strong or what have you. So what is it about that, about having a fantastical power, superhuman, something beyond our, that draws us to that? And is there something that we can think about in this moment, in this COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic moment, that just draws us into
Mhm.
this fantasy, but also trying to ground it a little bit in the world we actually live in?
Yeah, I love superheroes. I've been reading comic books my whole life, and part of it is I love the capes and tights and the good versus evil, but I think there's something very very Jewish about the storylines, and that's probably because comic books as we know them, the entire industry and most of the heroes were started by Jews in New York in the early and mid 20th century. We could talk for hours on just that alone, but you'll take me at my word for now. It's a Jewish industry. And I think the idea of superheroes is twofold. So on the one hand, we love the idea that if we get into trouble, Superman can swoop down and save us. He's bulletproof. He's super strong and super fast, and he can fly, and he will save us if need be. Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, Spider-Man, the Avengers, all of these heroes are people who come in and they save people who need assistance. At the same time, most of these superhero stories, many of them, uh, have a normal, regular person at the center of the story who becomes imbued with superpowers through some sort of accident. So Spider-Man gets bitten by a radioactive spider. Green Lantern gets a ring from a dying alien. The Flash, there's an accident in his police lab one night with chemicals and electricity. All these people are just regular folk who find themselves all of a sudden with this power, with this ability to do more than the average person, and they can use that to help themselves, but also they realize the responsibility of using that power to help other people. And I think that's why I like the superhero stories, because yeah, it's one thing to wait for Superman, but to say, you know, at some point I get bitten by a radioactive spider and I choose to be a hero. We all have some sort of power, some sort of super feat that we can perform, and it may not be flying or running really fast, but there's something. We have that power, and we wait for that moment, and when it comes, I like to think we can seize it and choose to be the embodiment of whatever that power is. I mean, for me, it's cutting paper. I don't know if that's much of a superpower, but it feels like it when I'm working. We all have a way that we can help ourselves and help each other.
I love that. I think that's so really interesting. One of the things that you just said really sparked something in me, and you have a better comic book understanding than I do. But it seems like many superheroes find their power or are given this power, and many supervillains try to create their power or seize their power. It's almost I don't know if that's really true. I'm just thinking very broadly for a minute, but it probably isn't
Mhm.
entirely true. But the idea that a superhero has this power and then tries to use that power in service of something, and then a supervillain is either trying to create or gain more power. It's this really interesting relationship between power and good and evil.
Yeah, I mean, that's I think that's a fairly astute observation. Characters like the Fantastic Four, who were created in the '60s by two Jewish guys, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, they get their powers through an accident. They're in a rocket ship. There are cosmic rays that they are bombarded with, and they have these powers. And they realize that with these powers, they need to do something with them. They need to make use of them. They can't just ignore the fact they have this talent. They have to be heroes. They have to use these powers to help other people. For Reed Richards, for Ben Grimm, who becomes the Thing, these are members of the Fantastic Four. Ben was teased as a child. He's Jewish. His character is Jewish, and he remembers that sense of being downtrodden, of being victimized. And for him, this is an opportunity to use his power to help other people so that no one else has to feel victimized. On the other hand, you have someone like Doctor Doom. Now, Doctor Doom also had a rough childhood, but when he gets power and tries to get more and more power, stealing it from building his own machines, casting spells, he wants all of the world to experience what he experienced, to understand his pain. So that's something that my wife and I talk about as another distinction between heroes and villains. Heroes and villains may have a similar story. Something happens to them and gets them to a point where they have power. Heroes choose to prevent others from experiencing the bad things they've gone through. Villains want everyone to experience that pain.
I love that. Yeah, that's amazing. And there's something deeply Jewish about that. That this idea of empathetic or empathetic ethics, right? That we were once victimized and tossed about. We were slaves in Egypt, and the goal is to break that chain, the chain of abuse, the chain of pain that happens, to break it.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. There's something really comic booky about that, but also really real and feels very indigenous to the Jewish soul in many ways, which I really love and support. Rabbi Mark
Yeah.
Miller's on Facebook. I don't know if you know him, but he has made some really cool comments. He talked about his grandfather who had a horse and wagon and collected scraps of paper, and eventually helped build up a business. And Ragman definitely sits well with him. And he was just kind of bringing up the messianic ideals of some of this. The Messiah himself or herself was supposed to be a normal person that gets elevated over time. Again, I think those are all some really nice religious kind of overtones. So you agreed to do a little cutting for us today. Do you wanna give that a your hand at showing us some of your craft?
Yeah. So we're gonna take the left. This is the beautiful thing about modern technology, right? We just move it around wherever we want to go. So I'm gonna set myself up here, and I think if this works out well, I'm gonna bring up another window. Look at that. So you might be able to see now, if you share this, my workspace here in my studio. I will let the director figure out what angle to be showing best. But yeah, this is where I cut paper all the time, and I've set up a few little things here so we can experience it together.
I love that. So no, go ahead.
I was going to say I showed you before what that finished product looks like, where there's that paper cut in the front and the comics in the back. I've got a whole bunch of things here, and I'd love to walk you through what I do. It's actually it's really easy to do. All you need, as I said, is a knife and some paper. It's the sort of thing that I would encourage you, if you want to be adventurous, you can order for curbside pickup at Michael's, a knife and a cutting mat for a handful of dollars, and do this sort of thing at home. You don't have to use comic books. I do. But certainly collage work has been done with newspapers and magazines and whatever materials are at hand. But I find it to be a very filling way of sort of escaping from the problems that I'm seeing out in the world, but also addressing some of those things. It gives me a way to maybe get out some of the emotions, and think of, just take that calming breath and create as opposed to fret.
I love that. So why don't you go ahead, show us what you got? What have you been working on?
Sure.
What's some easy things we can do?
Sure. So what I use for cutting is this watercolor paper here, and I think you should be able to hear that. This is fairly thick paper. It's not just the stuff that comes right out of your printer. We used to call it typing paper, and now apparently it's printer paper. But it's heavy duty stuff. It eats blades like crazy. So I'm using an X-Acto knife. It's a bit like a scalpel or the surgeon's knife there. This is a jar full of leftover blades. They do get dull. Paper just destroys these things. We have that metaphor about the drop of water falling onto the rock, and how eventually over thousands of years it wears away the rock. Paper will do the same thing to knives, but on a much quicker time frame. So the paper, the knife, and that's it. That's all you need. And in fact, I'm gonna right now angle towards the other camera. There's a few things. My wife and I actually travel around and we do workshops in paper cutting, leading people through this. And there's a few things that we always talk about: safety, making sure that you're not going to cut off your fingers, making sure that you're being respectful of the people next to you. The beautiful thing about being in my studio is there's no one next to me that I have to worry about. I don't have to worry about anyone but myself. I will often cut in my safety goggles. If you're only doing a little bit of cutting now and then, you can probably get by without them. If you're cutting every single day, the cumulative possibilities, the potential risk make it that I feel like maybe a little bit of safety gear is not a bad idea. So, we're basically just removing shapes, and what we're left with is where the comics are going to show through. It's a really straightforward process, and you can either draw out a design beforehand or just sort of freehand cut it. What people always ask though is, can I do this? I don't really draw. I'm not very good at, all my houses look like boxes and my trees look like broccoli, and I can't draw a face. I've never been much of an illustrator. The beauty of paper cutting is that it's very sculptural, and I find it's very simple. You don't need complicated shapes to tell a story. So, you can see this shape here that I've cut out in advance because I was prepared. I can hold it up to either camera. So these wavy lines are a really abstract form. They're nice and fluid. They don't really do much. If I put red behind them, so I've got a red comic book here, it gives the appearance of being maybe, fire, right? There's heat, there's warmth. You can imagine these flames rising from the burning bush or something. On the other hand, you take some blue comic and you put blue behind it, and all of a sudden you have water. The great thing about this is the comics do the heavy lifting. I don't have to be able to create realistic looking waves or flames, although I spend quite some time in the sketchbook trying to get the form exactly right. But you let the comics do the work for you. So what I've got here is actually a little miniature figure that I was working on. It's just a sketch. I'm not sure that I'm going to stick with it, but I was working on another golem. And you can perhaps see that his torso here, although I may be reversed. Am I reversed?
I mean, I see his torso. I don't know.
If I'm reversed, maybe that looks better. Can you see that it's an olive?
Oh, I see it now. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, it's that left to right thing that's problematic. So I made his body an olive, and it's supposed to be reminiscent of the olive that's that key letter in the word Emmet, in truth, and how you animate a golem. I thought, what if the olive is his body? I've been playing around with olive Mentoff, trying to get the whole thing in there, and it just I'm struggling with it. It doesn't always come easily. I've got pages and pages of golems made out of those 3 Hebrew letters, and they're just not quite right. But I figured I'd try a little one and see what happens. So I cut this out earlier. You can see there's the head and the body and the arms and the legs. And I've got some comics here that I thought I'd play around with and cut in. So what I've got here on my table is this cutting mat. This is a self-healing mat. It's a wonderful thing. This one's all scratched up. I do have to replace them occasionally, but you can cut through them and they heal back up and keep cutting. And all I'm going to do is I take the paper cutout. I can place it down over here, and I think I'm going to give him this sort of red, fiery body. So I'm going to place the cutout on top of the comic. And then I do a little tracing here just outside where I need to cut with a pencil. Ideally, when the light's good, I can then cut just inside those lines. I'm cutting the comics just like I cut the other paper. And God, I love
So
the sound
I
of
think
it.
while you're doing that, some folks are saying, "Oh, you make this look so easy. It's so amazing." I'm sure with some training, other folks could start learning this. Maybe talk a minute while you're doing that, just about like this pandemic moment and and how you think art could be therapeutic and help heal people, and how what art can say to us in a way that maybe just essay or reading a book, or even can't always achieve in the same part of our brain, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, part of this is, can art heal? Can it give us some sort of respite from trouble? Can it help us find some way of coping with the world around us? I mean, I think so. I find it. I find that that there's something about this sort of close attention, of doing this work with my hands, of sort of, distracting myself from reading the feed on Twitter or watching the news. There's something about working with my hands. And I'll tell you, we were in the garden yesterday replanting some succulents that my wife has. That is not the work of my hands that I enjoy, apparently. I knew that in advance, but I nonetheless gave it a shot. For me, there's something about the creating of form and narrative, of using my hands to tell a story, to maybe connect with our tradition in some way. The story of the golem, and all the little agadot that we have that talk about golems, they're part of our tradition. It's a way for me to connect with, things that our people have always talked about, ways that our people have coped with tragedy. And they've done so as well, not just by telling these stories, but by making art. If you think about, I'm just ripping some paper here to glue on. If you think about our people's connection to art and craft, this goes back to the Torah with Betzalel and all the craftspeople building the Mishkan in the desert, the Mikdash, right? This holy place that they would carry around where they could connect to God. We see art being used. There's this a mitzvah, the commandment called Hidur mitzvah, the beautification of commandments. So there is a commandment that in following the commandments, you should do so in a beautiful way, which is why you try and build a beautiful sukkah, or you may have a beautiful Chanukiah for Hanukkah, or your dreidels are fancy, or Passover, you may set a lovely plate for your Seder plate in the center. All of these things that we do are supposed to beautify our celebration. And so, creating art as a way of beautifying our stories and our connection to text and our connection to past generations, it feels like it's the same sort of thing. If not a direct commandment to create art, it feels that art is a way for us, perhaps, to make connections and to be holy in our observance.
Actually, it's really lovely that you said that, because I've been writing these weekly Divrei Torah, these weekly sort of inspirational messages based on the Torah portion, and what's come out of that a lot for me, especially in the first few books of the Torah, is just one of my very basic understandings that religion itself is not just a code of ethics, and it's not just it's not science for sure, but to be religious in the world today, to be spiritual, is essentially trying to be your own artist. That you have to craft the world, you have to craft your own spiritual life, and that what religion adds to the world today is very similar to what art adds to the world today. And I find just a lot of strength in that, in the understanding that maybe God was the original artist and the original artisan that crafted the world, and then it becomes our responsibility.
Well, certainly one can't. Yeah, I mean, you can't read the story of creation and not see God as a creator. Whether you mean this metaphorically or literally, I mean, God is creating things, and there's an artistry that comes to it, and as well, there's this sense that, right, we are partners in that ongoing creation. God may have handled the first 6 days, that we pick up the slack now by celebrating, by observing, by studying, by praying, by making things, by creating light and darkness. That I think that's certainly part of it. I mean, God, it's sort of like a collaboration of artists between us and God.
Yeah, I love that. That's like a really beautiful way of putting it. It's a real partnership. In some ways, that was the responsibility that God gave to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. When we were kicked out, so to speak, after the quote unquote the fall, right? The sin of the fruit and all of that. God says to Eve that she's going to have pain in childbirth, and God says to Adam, "You're going to have pain in bringing forth bread from the earth," so to speak. And while that might seem like a curse at first blush, it also gives purpose to life. That what Adam, what God has given to both Adam and Eve, and then essentially bequeathed to us in our tradition, is the power to create new life, to create the world that we see in front of us. And there's this old story that when Adam and Eve went back at the end of their lives, God invited them back to the garden again. And at the very end of their lives, with all the blessings and with all the tragedies, they turned to God and say, "You know what? I think we're okay." And they chose not to go back to the Garden of Eden, because a life without perfection that enables us and ennobles us to have the ability to shape our world around us is a more powerful life than a life that is just completely dependent without any purpose or direction. And so there's a wonderful old Hasidic story about that, which I just find to be really beautiful. How's your golem coming?
It's going pretty good. I'm going to put one more piece down and show you what I've got going on here. I've decided to stick with this blue and red that I put aside here. You know, I've got my entire childhood comic book collection behind me. That's what I'm cutting up for my work. I will often buy new things, new characters to, you know, add to it when I do something, but occasionally, sometimes there's pleasure just in using what's at hand. So those two pieces that I pulled aside here, I am using just that blue and the red. And I'm getting a nice little form here. It's really coming together. I'm enjoying it. You know, not stressing about it, just sort of enjoying the feel of the knife through the paper. You know, of the act of creation, even if it's not deeply thoughtful or you know, meaningful. Other than just, you know what, I'm finding solace in the creation of this golem. You know, again, knowing that there's protection, that either I have to make it or find it, but that we will get through this somehow.
Now, I see that with your golems, it's basically it's one heavy piece of paper you fold it over in half, and then you fold the cut over the collage, right?
Yeah, I find that really.
So is it meant to be a card, like you can open and close it? Is that something you're intending, or that's the final product is essentially what you see on the front?
Yeah, the final product is what you see on the front. I left those golems open just because I knew we'd be talking today. The last step is sealing up the back so that they are permanently closed. But yeah, it's sort of fun to be able to look in there. As I build it, I need it. But I thought it's nice to show that off on camera as well. So I left it for you, Noah.
No, I love that. Thank you so much.
The idea is that it's finished like this. And in fact, I'm going to lean down here and grab something out of a drawer. Let's see here. What do I have that I can pull out? Got some big stuff in here. So, you know, I showed you some smaller things, but the pieces do get larger. In fact, larger than this as well. That's when you really start to have some fun, I think, with the comics, filling in all these spaces. This is, you know, the menorah across the street from the Knesset building in Jerusalem. And this is actually all about story as well. So here's something that I discovered, but while working on this piece. The menorah in Jerusalem, right, that everyone takes a picture of, it's broken into all these little squares, which have all these little stories in them. It's the entire history of the Jewish people sculpted in relief on this menorah, which I thought was incredible. I've been to Israel a number of times. I've stood next to the menorah. I've taken many pictures. I've never looked closely. And I think we are rewarded by that moment where you stop, see where you are, recognize what's going on. In this case, it was because I realized there's story being told there. It was a book. And so my menorah is actually made in the same way of little episodes that refer to the Jewish story, things about, you know, here's being alone, or you ain't the only one who's lost people. This is what victory feels like. Give it everything. All these little speech bubbles that I find in the comics that, you know, become moments in our people's history to build this menorah. And again, it's an opportunity to sort of revisit our story and think about, you know, what does this mean to me as a Jewish person, as a Jewish artist? What does it mean right now? Certainly my work that I'm creating in this lockdown is very different than the work that I was creating a year ago. The work that I'm creating in this presidency is different than the work that I was creating in the last presidency. the work that I would create here is different than work I might create if I was living in Israel. So your surroundings and the time, they all, as an artist, they feed into, what you're making and what you're building.
I love that. If folks wanted to learn more about your art or to contact you directly, how do they do that? Where do they find you?
Sure. So one of the lessons I learned early on is you need a URL, a website that you never have to spell or explain again. My website is nicejewishartist.com. Nice Jewish artist, right? My email is isaac@nicejewishartist. I'm always glad to talk about this, to give you tips on where you can get supplies. I've got work up there, that I've done. That's where I post news about gallery shows. It's where you can also link to my store, link to my blog, all sorts of things. I also, if you're interested in seeing the sort of work that we do, I mentioned we do these workshops. My wife and I created this thing called Paper Midrash. That one I've probably got to spell, but it's papermidrash.com. And that is sort of the home for, what we bring together with teaching and paper cutting and comic books and lecturing and all this sort of stuff. It's fascinating to me. It's really an excuse for me to have the conversations with Shauna that I would have had anyway, or for that matter, to justify the comics that I buy. No longer have to explain away why I'm buying, capes and tights stuff. Now I can say, oh, it's for the Jewish art stuff, of course.
Yeah, but I think we live in a world now where no one has to justify any of that anymore.
I mean, it's certainly true that comic books have had a bit of a renaissance in recent years with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and even what DC is doing. There are TV shows. We were seeing a reemergence of interest in those stories. I don't know how long it's going to last. We had a huge spate of cowboy movies for a while, right? Everyone wanted to be the next Hopalong Cassidy. So, for me, I will always love superheroes. I'm so glad people are seeing what I see in them now, and enjoying the stories for what they are, which is, stories about how we can be heroes, how, the most recent Spider-Man movie, the animated Spider-Verse, right? So not many people know that Miles Morales, the young kid who becomes the new Spider-Man in that movie, was created by a Jewish comic book writer, Brian Michael Bendis. He lives in Portland, but he grew up in Cleveland. And his story is that he grew up in the shadow of these two other Jews from Cleveland who created Superman back in the 40s. And he always wanted to do that same sort of thing. And in fact, he's writing Superman now for DC. But the idea of Miles Morales was that anyone can wear the mask. Anyone can be a hero. It doesn't have to be, those, a bunch of white guys from New York, which is what all the comic book superheroes were 80 years ago. That anyone can choose to be a hero, to be a better person, whether you have superpowers or not. If you're just Batman or Iron Man, you make a suit or you buy a suit, you do the work so that you can be a hero. And I think that's what people, I think, are starting to see, that superheroes are not just an escape. They can be an inspiration.
I think that's so true. I think that heroes have always been an inspiration. And I mean, maybe in these moments where everything is really uncertain, we kind of lean into the fantastical just a little bit more because it gives us an escape or a sense of power. But it's one thing to read a comic book and look at beautiful art and amazing stories and almost in some ways more or less simplistic plot lines where there's clearly a good and clearly a bad. Although there's plenty of comics we know that really like to play with that and muddle that. But it's one thing to read that and then close it and say, well, that was interesting. Like, that was enough. And you put it back in the box or you collect it for later. And it's another thing to incorporate the sense of power, responsibility, the sense of inspiration into our own lives. And reading something in a book about a character who was imbued with special talent and then making that part of your life and living up to it is like the most Jewish thing you can do. Right? That's what makes the Torah, is that when you experience the world and it reminds you of the Torah, then the book is alive. Or when you read the Torah and it reminds you of real life, The Torah is alive. We put the book inside of us, and that has always been the Jewish way of being. I think is to put the book in us, literally and figuratively.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're called the people of the book, and I think it's because these stories are what make us who we are. I mean, I'm very much about narrative and about story and about what story means to us and how these stories move us forward. And yes, the natural world, the world around us, reminds me of those things that we've read or learned from, Torah and related texts. And likewise, we read in the Torah, and ideally, you see connections to the world around you. For people, who created comic books, what Stan and Jack saw was they saw the potential to tell empowering stories. Stanley always talked about that Spider-Man was really at the heart of the reason that he worked in comic books, was that the line that we all know that we can quote perhaps is, with great power must also come great responsibility. The idea that many of us have power, and if you do, you have a responsibility to use that, not just to protect yourself, although certainly that, but to protect others around you. And that is a very Jewish mission, I think, and that's what Stanley connected to, the idea that we have a responsibility and a burden. We are chosen for this. We have in front of us as Jews the constant opportunity to be good and to spread good, and we can't remind ourselves of that too much. We should always be thinking about the fact that Torah is not an end in and of itself, but it is a way to connect back to the world and to remind us of the people that we can be. And, comic books do a similar thing, I think. Bringing them together for me is just a fun way of exploring both and connecting to my tradition.
I love that. You want to show us the golem one last time to see? Did you finish it out?
So I'll show you another one. Yeah. So the golem in our story is an asexual automaton, and often represented as sort of male. I choose not to limit myself in that way. This is another golem figure that I've created, made out of Wonder Woman comics. In fact, you can see her hair is made out of the princess's hair. There's a little bit of her star design going on there. And it says, on a moonless night, she fashioned a child out of clay. And that's a reference to Wonder Woman's origin story, who in some ways that she's written is actually created by the Amazons out of clay. So she is a very golem-like figure who exists to, connect the Amazons back to man's world and to protect the world that she chooses to live in. So I wanted to have this sort of, big, strong female figure, as a reminder again that our conception of God is genderless and all genders, right? We talk about the Shekhinah, God's sheltering presence. It's really important to me that we remember that there are different elements to the idea of protection and strength and power and what they can mean.
Love that. That looks great. What's that one?
So this is made out of Superman comics, and I gave this golem wings. It was something that I was playing around with for quite some time. I really loved the idea of sort of what does it mean to be this sort of mystical object. And though we have this idea maybe of a heavy, solid clay or stone figure, why not something a little lighter, a little freer, a little slender of build? You can just make out Superman's S there in the center of his body. And as the golem has truth written on its forehead, here you can read the words truth and justice, which are those things that Superman stands for. And again, I like the idea of those sheltering wings we talk about for the Shekhinah. So maybe the golems are a stand-in for some sort of divine presence here. Again, reminding us that though this is a source of protection for us, golems are something that we make. We have to be in charge of our own salvation, or we partner with God to save ourselves. Whatever it is, we are what is it? We are not allowed to refuse the task. We don't have to finish it, but we are not allowed to step back and let the world pass us by. We have to, intentionally engage in our own salvation.
I love that. I'm going to give you 2 ideas for golems. Can I give you ideas for golems?
Bring it on.
I really think you should make a doctor golem. Not like a Doctor Strange golem, but a doctor who's wearing surgical gear or something along those lines. Or a scientist golem, because they're the ones who are going to try to find this vaccine for us. And we need them. And, you know, other ones like EMTs or first responders golems, or a caretaker golem who's taking care of the most vulnerable amongst us. Because they're the ones who are holding up the end of the society right now.
Yeah, it's that's very true. Those are great ideas. I mean, yeah, we have heroes all around us right now. We may not always see them. I mean, I rarely see anyone except my wife, kids, and dogs these days, but we see stories about them on the news, or we read about them or hear about them. And yeah, those are the people on the front lines, the doctors, the scientists, the nurses, for that matter, the people who are still somehow managing to put together basic services like food at the schools, right? Our school was still giving out meals for those who needed them through a drive-by service. There's so many people who have chosen to be heroes now, who've said, this is my power, this is what I do, I can do this and I can help others and I can be a source of light and healing.
That's amazing. Well, Isaac, thank you so much for being on with me and taking the time this morning. It's a real pleasure, and I feel real privileged to have you with me in my backyard with me and allowing me into your studio. It's just been wonderful. I want to thank everyone for tuning in this morning. And again, can you give us your contact info or where to find you online, how to get in touch with you, etc.?
nicejewishartist.com. You can find my email there. You can find all the information you might need. Reach out. I'm glad always to talk about art, to talk about comics, to talk about whatever. Reach out and connect. That's all we can do right now, is just be with each other as a virtual community. And I'm here.
Are you booking online workshops? Are you there yet? Are you working on it?
We are on hold. We obviously canceled all of our spring engagements. We had plans to be on all coasts of the country this season with Paper Midrash. We will be scheduling them as soon as the world is ready for us to come back out and teach about comics. If you're interested, that's papermidrash.com, PAPERMIDRASH. Residencies, workshops, all sorts of things. We're ready when the world is ready.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Isaac. It's been a joy being with you and learning from you, and just discussing all things from comic books to paper cutting to religion to spirituality to this crazy moment we find ourselves in. And again, I want to thank everyone for joining us this morning. I'm Rabbi Farkas from Valley Shalom, and I'm joined by my good friend Isaac. I can never pronounce your middle last name correctly. The Y throws me. The Y and the J they just throw me off. How do you pronounce that again?
Brynjegard-Bialik.
That's what it is. Brynjegard-Bialik.
It's just like it's spelled.
Right. Isaac Double B, it's been great to have you with us. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and I'll see you next week.